Hello everyone, and welcome to the Bandit's Den. This is going to be the first video I've ever made about a working that I've done. I haven't done very many because I try to save them for when they could really be useful. As it should be. If you have a real-world problem that you can deal with real-world actions, physical world actions, then it's suggested you do that instead of turning to magic to be a solution for every problem in your life. And that's exactly how I run things here. So it's usually not necessary, and so I don't do a whole lot of workings. But when I do, they usually turn out pretty good. So this one is protective, which is the type of working that's recommended for beginners because you can always use more protection. It's not like you can really cast a protection spell and not really mean it, unless you're some sort of masochist, in which case, if you enjoy torturing yourself and having a shitty life, then maybe a protective spell isn't something you should start out with. Maybe you should start out with trying to summon a demon to possess you or something. Something stupid like that. So, yes, this was a protection spell, and it's been pretty successful. I've had a lot less problems on my property since I did it. And of course, I've put up other things that are more traditional to my religious spiritual practice. I use the term religious really loosely there. I don't belong to any group of people or anything. But I do follow a really old religion that is arguably dead. So, yeah, this is more eclectic. It doesn't really fall under any specific practice or any specific spirituality. I kind of took some things that I learned here and there and mashed them together into a customized working that I quite enjoy. And of course, a lot of people who practice magic don't do this. A lot of them like to stick to what they were taught because they grew up in this, or stick to one type of magic. I'm more eclectic in the magical world. In the spiritual world, I'm more reconstructionist. So anyways, what I did, and I'm reading my book that I wrote it in here. What I did was I took a plank of pine wood and I split it into 4 sections, and I made sure each section was pointed at one end and flat on the other, because I was going to drive these stakes, one in each corner of my property, thus creating a perimeter for the spell to protect. And I don't really cast circles much anymore, only when I see it necessary, when I'm doing stuff closer in line with the tradition of circle casting, Wiccan type stuff. I'll go ahead and cast a circle, but not very often, not anymore. I did it for every working when I was first starting out, but I really don't see it necessary most of the time. So I casted a circle, and here I wrote, you can invoke any protective god if it's applicable to you. I just invoked the element of spirit for the 5th and final part of the circle. And if anybody doesn't know about circle casting, go ahead and look it up. Hearth Witch describes it pretty well. I'll probably be referring you guys to her channel quite a bit concerning magic. because I learned a lot from her. And so what I did was I ground up mugwort and feverfew in the mortar and pestle. Mugwort is seen as a generally magical herb, and so I was seeking to amp up the protective powers of feverfew. And I used burnt Palo Santo to inscribe protective gods' names, and I forget what it was. I wish I would have written it down here. It might have been Thor. I might have inscribed Thor in runes on each stake. And then what I did was and this whole time, I'm keeping in mind, alright? This is how my spell work works, is keeping in mind and focusing and drawing energy at the same time from the earth and focusing on my intention, my intended goal. What is this going to achieve? All the meanwhile, manipulating energy, drawing it into myself so that I can push it into whatever I'm working with. All right. And so after I inscribed the name or names on the stakes, I dropped pine oil onto the top of each stake. I believe it was not on the top, the flat top, it was on the front of it where I inscribed the names. Yeah, and I put pine oil on the face of it, and I rubbed the herbal powder that I ground up into the oil. And then I dripped more pine oil on top of that. And pine oil has protective properties. It comes from a spiny plant that doesn't have a whole lot of animals that like to feed on it because it's really uncomfortable. There are, of course, beetles and stuff. I mean, everything has its weakness, but you can try to cover your bases. You know what I'm saying? And so I dripped more pine oil on top of the herbal mix powder that I ground up in the mortar and pestle. And then I used candle wax from the candle I was using for light during the working. I dripped the candle wax over top of the powder that had oil all over it in order to seal that stuff into the stakes. And I'm not going to tell you guys the incantation I used here. I would say write something down, work on it, and go with whatever. If you're going to do this working word for word, ingredient for ingredient, thought process by thought process, energy by energy, all that stuff, I would recommend composing an incantation beforehand, before you even cast your circle. And when you have made it, you can go ahead and start your working, and make sure to go word for word with your incantation. Alright? And don't worry if you mess up a little bit. It's fine. Just stay focused. Alright? It doesn't matter if you mess up a little. What matters is the final product has all of your intention and all of the energy from the earth put into it. Alright? And so what I did was I put my hands across all four stakes, and I pushed the energy that I had been gathering while keeping in mind my intention and the intended purpose of this working. I pushed all of that energy into the stakes through my hands. And then I used a blessed tool to drive the stakes into each corner of my property below ground level so that nobody sees them and so that they're impossible to pull up. It would be rare for somebody to intentionally mess up one of your workings, the physical objects that you've imbued with power. It's pretty rare because most people don't know what they're looking at. But I do have a story if you guys want to stick around. Oh, and of course, it's optional, but I would recommend it. Make an offering to the god or gods you invoked if you did. And I would recommend continuing to make offerings to those gods or that god for however long you want the working to be in place and effective. Now that's a good way, and before I start my story, that's a good way to make sure that the working still has power, is to just make offerings to a god on a regular basis so that they can tend it and make sure that it continues to work. And I've found that to be really effective. I mean, there's a handful of gods that I try to work with closely, and I think they're a pretty good spread. They're not all of the gods for my tradition, but they're a pretty good spread that should cover just about anything that's really important to me. And so I make offerings to them, not as much in the summer because I can't burn my offerings, and that's what I like to do because really, the time I was born, the place I was born, a lot of it has a lot to do with light and fire, and so that's just how I am. I like burning stuff. So I prefer to burn my offerings. And I mean, they're not extravagant offerings that like somebody could use or something, you know. I won't go further into it, but they understand, I believe. And every time I do have a fire in my backyard, I make sure to burn some offerings in it. So anyways, that's about it. That wraps it up. Once you're done driving the stakes, you don't have to worry about it other than making offerings, or once in a while brushing up if you didn't invoke a god, once in a while you might want to brush up the dirt that's over top of the stake and re-energize it with the same ointment that you put on it originally, while maybe saying some new incantations for keeping the working going. Whatever feels comfortable to you, whatever means the most to you, because that's what counts a lot. Putting things out into the universe, if it means a lot to you, then the universe will be more receptive to it. And that's what I've found. And there's, anyways, that's the end of the working. Just so you guys know, I'm glad I was able to fit it into 13 minutes. And so if you guys want to stick around for a story concerning the first time I knowingly had interaction with witchcraft. I was about 22 years old. I was looking at a house that was going to be remodeled, and it's a long story why I was looking at the house. That's all beside the point. But man, this place had original flooring from the early 1900s, most likely. It was really southwestern, like the kind of stuff you see on old western movies, with the wood floor that's so old that from the slight weathering of the desert, there's cracks that big between the slats, so that if you drop a penny just right, you'll never get it back without opening up the floor. So yeah, we were rummaging through the place, and I looked down, and there was this wrapped up fabric, and it was nice and neat. It was black with white embroidery on it. It was black felt with white embroidery on it, and it was held together with brown string. And so I picked it up, and the brown string was old, so it kind of deteriorated and fell apart. So this thing started unraveling in my hands, and what I had was four little felt flags, about that big. And they had different signs embroidered on them, and I couldn't figure out what the signs were. One of them looked like a donkey. Another one looked like a orb on a upside down crescent moon. Another one looked like somebody standing on top of a hill. And another one had something to do with a cross. And there was a figure inside of all of these. And it fell out. At first, I dismissed it. I was like, whatever, weird thing. That's a stupid figurine. It fell down. And I ignored it. But as I walked out of the house, it dawned on me. I was like, oh, this is a piece of witchcraft, what I have here. And so I asked everybody I knew about it. Everybody I knew that knew something about the occult. I asked about it, and nobody knew anything really to tell me other than perhaps it's some old Christian form of witchcraft, because it had the donkey, the person on the hill, and a cross on it. And what looked almost like a Holy Communion and a goblet, but it could have also been the sun and the moon. I don't know. But nowadays, I know that was most likely a binding rune. A binding working. Sorry, not rune. It was most likely a binding working. And perhaps this person was trying to instill things that had to do with those flags into the person that was represented by the figure. That's my best idea, which is a better idea than anybody was able to give me at the time. So anyways, that's an interesting fun fact about me. The first time I knowingly was exposed to real witchcraft at the age of 22. The ripe young age of 22. Pretty interesting. That was a long time ago. Anyways, guys. And I'm not one of those young ones that thinks 3 years is a long time. Believe me, it was much longer than that. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was somewhat educational. And I did notice a big difference in the security of my property. Nobody bothered me after that. And nobody witnessed me doing that. Some problematic people in the backyard of my next door neighbor just up and vanished after that. And his crazy girlfriend stopped going into my backyard. All kinds of good stuff happened as a result of that. So, anyways, I hope you guys have a blessed day. I think that's a good way to end a witchcraft video. I don't usually say that. I usually say stuff like, well, thanks for joining me. Hey, thanks. It was fun talking to you and stuff. But forgive me if I seem a little awkward now, because I just shared something with you that's very up close and intimate, and now I feel really exposed, because this kind of thing isn't something I would normally talk about. But anyways, you guys stay strong out there. Don't worry about crazy fucks persecuting you, because they're fucking idiots and uneducated. And you guys, as always, I need to come up with a saying. Later.